Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. It is so good to have you guys. Phillise, are you frozen? She may. Okay, she's calling back.
I think
Let me
I'm
get her back
back.
in. Yep, I think you got frozen. All right, let me get you out of the other one. Hi everyone. Let's get it going here. And let me shut. Okay, now I have to shut the frozen one off. Oh no, we're having a problem. Call back, Felice. It figures the best laid plans for a live show seem to always have a problem. Here we are! Yay! Welcome, Felice. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I don't know what happened. That was really weird. And can you hear us? I hope everybody's can
Yeah,
hear us. All right. All right. Good. 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 So how you been? And welcome.
thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Good. Well, we
I've
have
been
quite a
good.
show. Yeah. Tell us what you've been doing.
I just prepared a video for a conference I'm presenting at next week called The Science of Consciousness.
That's
It's
exciting.
hosted by the Consciousness Center at Arizona University. And I'm super excited to have been invited to speak. I'm talking about my PhD research on magnetoreception. I call it the sixth human sense.
Wow.
So if you're interested, you can check that out. Sir Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize winner in physics of 2020, is going to be speaking there too.
Oh my
So it's
God.
really exciting to
Yeah.
participate in that conference.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his.
Great. Well,
Yeah.
I'm happy for you. I think this is really exciting. Well, we have quite a show talking about. Well, you've got your talking points. I've been researching, and Felice has been researching, and I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce the topics. And I'm just going to say hi to all of you without all your names today because there's so many of you here.
Hey,
So
everyone.
take it away. Take it away.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear from everyone in the chat because we really want to get some input today. And I just first want to start by just framing the conversation that we want to have because I don't know if we did the best job of doing that last time. So, just to talk about what conversation we want to have. So up to this point, we all know that climate change, the conversation has been dominated by activists. Okay, and we love the activists. Many of
There
us
today.
are activists. We, at the very least, are supporting the activist agenda, the green agenda, with our purchases, with our choices, with our voting. Um, but I think there comes a point where we need to give ourselves permission to have a conversation about the possibility that activism does not prove to be effective going
Mm.
forward in the future. Just between us friends, right, having this little sidebar conversation, let's just for a moment think about, well, what would that mean if our activist efforts don't bear fruit?
Mm.
And what do I mean by bear fruit? What is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is we need to reduce carbon emissions.
Yeah.
So it's
Good luck.
great the that there's so much more awareness around climate change thanks to the tremendous protest efforts with, the school days, the Fridays, Greta Thunberg, and
Fridays for the
with
future. Yeah.
Extinction. Yes, Fridays for the Future. Thank you.
Hmm.
And Extinction Rebellion. I think the awareness has never been higher. There's talk of social tipping points, and I think all of this is great. But we also need to look at the fact that despite all the efficiency gains in renewable energy, despite all the conference of the parties that we've had, despite all the activism, okay, emissions have not gone down except for a small blip during the Great Recession and another blip during the pandemic lockdowns.
Yeah.
So is it crazy? I'm sure activists would not want to, would not object to us entertaining the possibility that emissions don't aggressively go down in the future as we would all like them to, right?
Right.
And so what are the two pathways that activists have been working towards to get emissions to come down? Well, there's two pathways. One is green growth, transitioning our economy through a Green New Deal to get our economy to run on green energy. That's one option. The other option is degrowth. I call that the planet of the humans solution. People said there was no solution. So I disagree. The solution was very clear. It's advocating degrowth. Okay. In our last discussion and in my video series on my YouTube channel, I discussed some of the challenges with both of these options, not to persuade people to give up on them, but simply to possibly explain why they haven't worked. Because at the end of the day, green growth and degrowth have not succeeded yet in lowering emissions. Now, if you want to say, oh, well, we just need more time, fine, have at it.
Have at it.
I have, though, presented some reasons, and I won't go into them in depth here. I'll just briefly summarize. The impediments to green growth are energy return on investment, and we're going to put some additional information on that in the description. There's a great interview with Charles Hall that was done on the Rational View podcast in July of 2021. He references a paper by Kaplan Perez, which looks at energy return on investment for a Green New Deal type plan that could be as low as 3 to 1 when society needs at least a 10 to 12 to 1. Also, we've mentioned the work of Tim Garrett, which you showed the highlights of some of his conclusions, his mathematical equations showing that, we have historical precedent that adding new energy, such as renewable energy, to the mix just expands the pie, right? Yes, renewables have been growing as a percentage of energy usage, but the total amount of energy being used is also expanding at such a rate that the renewables are not pushing out the fossil fuels. Now, yes, the purpose of the COPs is to outright ban fossil fuels, but how's that been working? Not working too well.
No, nor have the emissions.
And lastly, in terms of voluntary degrowth, some of the challenges there are, at the end of the day, we can blame politicians, but we, the voters, put politicians there. And if the voters aren't willing to accept reduced standards of living through lower energy use, and I don't know about what these utopia visions about degrowth, and we're all going to be on basic income and live off solar panels, and it's just going to be we're just going to have better jobs. Like, no, if you have less energy, I'm sorry. If a society has less energy, it's going to mean more of us are going to be putting more of our energy towards survival activities, right? There's going to be less fun jobs or less jobs that aren't working in agriculture to grow food or to make food. Or to get more energy, right? And also degrowth, it would lead to financial collapse. And how would you fund carbon capture or environmental restoration if you want to do that. So I've talked about that in other videos elsewhere. We don't want to dwell on that, but today we want to look at, I propose, based on Tim Garrett's work, that eventually emissions will come down. And they will come down through the only mechanism that they have ever come down in the past, which is a contraction. I won't say collapse. I'll say contraction of global. Emissions will come down when there is a contraction of global industrial economy, the global industrial economy. Okay. So once that begins to contract, as it did in the Great Recession, as it did in the pandemic lockdowns, that's when we will see emissions come down. And so what I want to propose to your audience today is two mechanisms, two sort of competing mechanisms for how this drawdown of emissions, this contraction of economic activity could occur. One is climate change. Okay, that is our waste management problem, as I like to call it. And the other is...
I like that.
The other is, right, we have a waste management problem, but we also have an energy production problem, which interestingly enough is also coming to a head at the same time as our waste management problem.
Wow.
I don't know. Did someone orchestrate that? I don't know. But we've got another peak in oil, like what we saw in 2005 in conventional oil that triggered the Great Recession. I'll talk about that in just a moment. Okay. So we've got that next peak in fracking oil around 2030, if not sooner, if not now, actually. But we also have a blue ocean event in the Arctic that could happen as early as 2030. So both of these two looming catastrophes have this 2030 date kind of looming over them, which is interesting. I don't know, I find.
Pretty heavy.
So, yeah. So I'll just share some details about each of these two pathways to contraction. All right. And then I want to hear from everyone else. What do you guys think? And which pathway do you see playing out faster? And where do you think we need more data, more information? And if anyone finds it, put it in the comments, right?
All right. Yes. And I also ask everybody that has a burning question and all that, put a Q in front of it so I can see it in the chat, because there's a lot to do when I am manning the controls. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start with climate change. Okay. And one of the big sort of scenarios in which climate change can bring about a contraction in economic activity is if there's not enough food to go around for all of us to continue to engage in said economic activity. For me, that is really the biggest risk of climate change, is agriculture collapse.
Okay.
And there are sort of three drivers of how climate change impacts agriculture. One is through just the sheer temperatures. And we're starting to see that underway in like Central America, where the extreme heat waves are actually hindering crops. But it's compounded by an explosion of invasive pests that are attacking crops as well. So those are sort of dual problems that are happening already in the equatorial regions of the world. But Michael Mann, one of the references that we put in the description, I believe, Michael Mann did a paper about the jet stream breakdown. as the Arctic warms and the temperature in the Arctic gets warmer and warmer, there's less of a temperature differential between the equator and the North Pole.
Right.
And when the temperature difference decreases, that's what's causing the jet stream to break down. And so Michael Mann did a paper where he predicts that because of the way the jet stream is waving, it just so happens that those waves are intersecting with the breadbaskets of the world. And it just so happens that as we reach this sort of 4C, as we get higher and higher, that in temperature, that the chances of having simultaneous collapses of across the globe in the United States, Russia, Ukraine, France, right? That probability increases. So it's not fanciful to suggest that, if we get to 4C, there's also another interview I just saw. The author he wrote the book 6 Degrees, and he just did a really good interview where he goes through the changes we can expect at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 degrees. I'll find it because I can't recall his name at the moment.
And I'll put it in the
unless
show
someone
notes.
else, yeah, or else unless someone pops it into the chat.
Okay.
But at 4C, we can be pretty confident of agriculture collapse. Okay, so when can we expect to see sort of a 4C type scenario? Okay, well, the IPCC, the CMIP6, the latest climate models, showed in the extreme case 7.6 degrees of warming by 2100, worst case, which, depending on if that's a linear or exponential trajectory to that point, puts you at 4C, could put you at 4C around 2050. If we had a blue ocean event in the Arctic by 2030, Paul Beckwith did a really nice video where he speculates that within a decade, that's when you would see the full effects of that loss of albedo, latent heat.
Now,
I put a reference.
I just wanted to ask, it'll be the loss of Arctic ice in the summer completely, but it won't be in the winter yet.
Correct. But what Paul does is he sort of goes into the radiative forcing and the change in the radiative forcing over the months, and how, yes, you'll have that blue ocean event in September, but then the next year it'll spread out possibly to the anchoring 2 months. And then each year in the summer will be longer and longer and longer. The ice-free period in summer will be longer and longer and longer. And this is definitely a back of the envelope calculation. It's a guesstimate, but within a matter of a decade, you could have an ice-free Arctic completely, as per his assessment. And I left a paper that showed once we do lose the Arctic albedo, it will advance global warming by about 25 years, like the equivalent in carbon, like equivalent emissions, if you will, would advance us in warming just from the albedo, not even considering the latent heat effect. But just from the albedo, it would be an advancement of about 25 years. So you could see a scenario that could get us to 4C fairly by quickly. 2040. Right. Very
That's
quickly.
pretty heavy.
It is. I often wonder why the mass media, when they talk about the threats of climate change, why do they always talk about sea level rise? Sea level rise is devastating, don't get me wrong. Entire island nations are being wiped off the face of the earth, and those communities, those cultures are going to have to up and relocate somewhere else. provided we have the open hearts and the good sense to welcome them, these
Mm-hmm.
climate refugees. So that is a
Oh,
tragic
okay.
story,
Very.
but it's not an extinction story in and of itself. Sea level rise is not an extinction story for humans. But agriculture collapse is definitely one that could be. I want to mention there are some other estimations that you would see agricultural collapse within 1 year of, say, a 1 degree rise in temperature because it's so rapid that plants and crops and the living creatures and soils, right, would not be able to adapt to a temperature rise that quickly. I know Guy McPherson has mentioned that. I haven't found a study on that to show that if
Oh.
the rise in temperature, say we lose global dimming, and the estimates are that temperatures rise by 1 degree, just as a result of a cessation of industrial activity, the aerosols fall from the sky, there's no longer any global dimming, that is believed to will have an effect of about 1 degree. I haven't seen in the studies that show that rapid a temperature change in that short a period of time would then in the next growth season lead to complete agricultural collapse. So if anyone has information on that, please share. But the studies that we do have only look at the jet stream, for example, the man paper, or they only look at warming. And if you just look at warming, it says every 1 degree rise in temperature will lead to about a 7% drop in crop yields. That's not catastrophic. So there's a huge question mark here as to how much warming, how fast would actually begin to impact us in the developed world. It's already, we should be sensitive to the fact that it's already affecting people in other countries in the equatorial region.
Oh, yeah.
In devastation. So that's, I think, the picture as to climate change. And I think the biggest, I would say, sort of tipping point. I do want to add that worst case scenario in the IPCC CMIP 6,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the 7.6C by 2100. I think they got the CMIP 6, all the models were running very hot. And so they tweaked it for the last IPCC report where they got rid of some of the models that were showing those really, really high, temperature rises. They had a reason for doing that those models weren't accurate. Okay. I still look at the high end cases because even Michael Mann says that our projections aren't wrong, but real temperature, real global warming has been tracking towards the high end of our projections. So even Michael Mann is on record of admitting that, we tend to
No
trend towards the
kidding.
high end. Right. And that's
We're
because the
such
models don't
fans of
incorporate.
the man. Not.
Well,
Oh no!
I feel that I'm on safe
Yeah.
I feel that I'm on safe water if I can quote him. And
Well,
if
yeah,
we,
because he has a lot of research articles, research that he's done with other scientists. So you just, you can't discount because his personality as a schmuck that he is actually, a scientist that has merit. And I'm answering that to somebody in my chat. That's all.
I hear you. I would just say, continuing to go on news broadcasts and say we need to lower emissions, we need to lower emissions, we need to lower emissions. From a scientific perspective, that's accurate. As a scientist, that's accurate.
Yes.
It does not in any way, shape, or form take into account the social, political, economic circumstances that make that challenging. So simply repeating that refrain, I don't know how effective that
Well,
then becomes if
it's
we don't
not.
engage in a wider conversation. Right, right.
Well, he
I'm
doesn't. I
trying to be
mean, there's others that do though, and that's okay.
right.
He has his purpose. Everyone has a
Yes,
purpose, a piece of the puzzle.
exactly. Exactly. We all have a piece of the puzzle. He really is an expert in the actual climate science per se. And so that's why I do like to quote a lot of the papers, and I definitely consider him to be sort of one of the go-to people in terms of the science
Yeah,
of climate change.
absolutely.
So, okay. But we still have to consider all of these other factors. Right? So,
Absolutely. A lot of
right. We still have
them.
to consider that. Okay, so that's pretty much all I have. Are there questions about agriculture collapse, tipping
All
point, the timing, other
right.
information that other people have that we might want to think about
Let's
and consider
see.
before we move on to
Yeah,
the
there's quite a few.
energy crisis?
Quite a few I have. Now, as always,
Uh,
Gary Hoover. Gary is a very vocal participant, which I always appreciate. And Gary has some questions here, and please put a cue. All right, so let's start out with Gary's first one that I think goes for this. Folks in the chat talking about gardens. What do you think? Vandana
yeah,
Shiva in India started Gardens of Hope to grow food to feed people locally, but also to reconnect people and earth in love. And of course, I'm a grower, but I guess I
yeah.
have to qualify that with what happens when it gets too hot to grow gardens. But for now, what do you think, Patrice? I mean,
Well, I
Phyllis.
think
What do
that
you say,
that's,
Patrice?
yeah, no, I think that's an interesting question. So I'm forgetting the name of the founder of Extinction Rebellion. I think there's an interview
Roger
of him
Hallam.
where he said that, yes, thank you. He was an organic gardener. And he's quoted as saying that he started Extinction Rebellion when the weather conditions in England became such that it was threatening his own garden. And if we go into a degrowth scenario,
Hmm.
society is going to have to roll itself back, right? This industrial, consumer driven society is going to roll itself back. And I used to think, oh, well, we can all just live very ecocentrically in small communities, growing our own food, living locally, off of some green energy. Charles Hall, in the interview I mentioned,
Hmm.
cites another study that is really interesting. It's by Carrie King, and it was a 2015 study called Comparing World Economic and Net Energy Metrics. And if we do scale down society using green renewable energy and we have an energy return of about 3 or 5 to 1,
Hmm.
we can expect to live in a society that would look like England in the 1500s, where about half
Wow.
of our economic activity would go towards creating more energy. And so, what does that mean? Yes, we have technology, but if you don't have the surplus energy to support economic activities that are not critical to
Right.
survival, you're just not going to have the surplus energy to do it.
Okay.
So, I used to think, well, maybe we can all downsize, live in local, um, permaculture centered communities. But if we have launched these climate tipping points to the point where global agriculture collapses, then yes, your own garden may not be affected this year, but you have a risk that at some point you may have a year where your harvest doesn't come in. And if that is your only source of food and nourishment, then that is a risk.
So that's where the preppers come in, even the permaculturists and the preppers, I would say.
Yes.
All right,
I would
let's
say, how do you
see.
prep
What
for
you grow
the
it and can it
perpetual
now.
collapse?
You grow it and can it
Sorry.
now. For you can. You grow it and you
Yeah.
can now, like I do, and you say, for things that will be workable for 10 years at least. But, that's not
Yeah.
even a guarantee. That's no guarantee.
But I think that's a really good idea,
That's what I
especially
do.
if you're in a region where you think the climate effects are going to be less severe than other regions. You kind of carve yourself out a safe haven in the north, right? Northern. And say you have a bad harvest one year or a couple of years.
Yeah.
Well, if you have that food preservation, then that can maybe get you by to the next year. I think we run into problems if these extreme weather events due to the jet stream breakdown start to happen year after year after year after year, where you're getting flooding, you're getting heat waves that just wipe out your crop over a
Which is
matter of a
happening.
week,
I mean, it's happening. That's what's happening.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Let's see what's next.
Other,
Everybody's interested. This is pretty good. Okay. Well, let me pull up a comment by Steph C. She says, I agree that gardening will get harder, but if more people were home to help one another, it would be easier to do in the meantime, and we may actually get along better for the time being. So I take that to be like, I'm blessed to be in an area where it's all farmers markets, and it is like that, but it's not like that in cities. But we could take city blocks and make them into gardens. I mean, there's a lot to do there. Thank you, Steph.
yeah, thank you. That is great. And yeah, I think that there are going to be regions. I personally am, if I had to guess, and this is just a guess, I don't envision agriculture collapsing everywhere all at once, nowhere to
No,
grow anything like within a year.
no.
I think there will be areas where you will still have agriculture. I think we're just going to see the crop failures grow and grow and grow until some tipping point is reached at some point on the
Mm-mm.
global market. So I think the skill of knowing how to grow your own food is great and useful. Just keeping in mind that you also have to develop the skill of seed saving and preserving food for those times when you have those extreme weather events that wipe out your crop. I also think indoor gardening, I'm going to talk more about artificial habitats later when I get to our energy problem. Indoor gardening is also a solution when you're dealing with those extreme weather events. There's a guy, Greenhouse in the Snow. It's a great video. You got to see this guy,
Okay.
Greenhouse in the Snow. Look at it on YouTube, where he
Okay.
grows tons of crops year round in the snow. Um,
That's
Using
cool.
nothing but geothermal, so very low energy input.
I have to
It's
watch
really,
that.
you have to watch it.
Have to watch that.
Kirsten
Oh my
Durst
God.
is she does a lot of alternative living housing videos. She did a video with
Okay.
him, and it's really great.
Good. Good,
So
good,
I think that
good.
that's definitely an option. I also like this idea of rewilding humanity. I kind of came up with that term myself, rewilding
Oh,
humanity. I was
you're preaching
inspired.
to the choir here. I'm looking for Rick. He's a permaculture rewilding person. I think I have Rick Larson. He is amazing. I've learned from him so much.
Well, this is actually rolling back the clock even further. So
Yeah.
humans developed agriculture about 10,000 years ago when temperatures stabilized and carbon dioxide levels stabilized. But if you go back further, for 200,000 years, humans were hunter-gatherers. So if tipping points don't destroy all of wild nature, and we've done a pretty good job of
Oh,
destroying
we
most of
have.
it anyway, but you
We
can
have.
find corners of the world in the north, in the Arctic, the Alaskan Wildlife Refuge, where there are still people who are living off, the land. It's being threatened even in those last vestiges of the wild. Being
Yeah.
able to live off the wild is being threatened. But if agriculture collapses and if we're not able to sustain agriculture, then I would argue humanity would have to go back to a hunter-gatherer society, not an agricultural society.
Right.
There's a movie called Living Wild, or the website Living Wild. There's a woman, British woman, I'm forgetting her name, but she has an entire course in Scandinavia that teaches people how to live in the wild with nothing, make your own tools, weave your own baskets, hunt your own food, gather your own berries. I mean, it's incredible. You have to watch this movie. I'm totally inspired by her. And I hate to say it, but if climate is not completely destroyed so that the wild nature is also destroyed with it, then if we don't have sustainable agriculture, that may be where ultimately humanity may have to relearn some of those skills. So we may have to have some rewilding of humanity.
And of course,
There.
there's poppy. There's not enough land for everyone to garden or gather, which is societal collapse.
And this is, I think, important. When we talk about degrowth, I know there are these fantasy notions of degrowth doesn't mean less economic activity. It means more for everyone. We're just going to share better. It doesn't matter if we share, we're still sharing surplus energy. So if the surplus energy isn't there with renewables, as I've made the case in other places, then there isn't going to be anything much to share. And so when we talk about degrowth, when we talk about a collapse of global industrial civilization, we have to also acknowledge that right now, real people depend on the capitalist system that we are in for their job to feed their family. So if we go into any type of degrowth, that means someone is losing their job. Any type of economic recession, economic contraction, that does real harm. You have real families at food banks not able to make ends meet, homeless on the street when we talk about recession. So thank you for that comment, because as we advocate an end to capitalism, as we advocate an end to emissions, we also have to understand that we're not equipped to survive without a job and going to the grocery store to feed our families. And so
Not
if the
now.
economy shrinks and we're losing our jobs, you
No.
know, there are nothing but bad choices all around. I mean, this is a bad situation all around. We can't deny that.
All right.
All right.
Let's see. We
So
have
can we go on?
Colinello's here. When the supermarkets break down, millions will starve because we're dependent. Learn to grow a garden and get local now. Thank you, Colinello, and it's nice to see you here, by the way. Colinello is
Yeah,
part
thank
of a
you.
chat
That's good
that
advice.
it's great to have you here. Yeah, it is. I'm
Yeah,
very happy
great
because he's
advice.
new. Oh, we have more. More.
All right.
In
More.
India, drought and water rights are an issue, plus farmers being forced to do industrial turning oil to food farming results in increased farmer suicide as crops fail.
Yeah,
Farms are lost. Do you have
yeah.
a comment maybe back about what's happening there?
I do. You know, when I saw the war in Kashmir, where India, they elected a very nationalist leader, and Crimea was this independent territory, well, pseudo independent, and India just came in and took that independence away. And I said to myself, what does Crimea have that they want? What resource do they have that they want? And sure enough, it's the water. It's the access to fresh water, right? That's one of the main resources in that region. And I'll come back to that when I talk about Greenland, who
All right.
Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, but is autonomous, and they've just made the decision to not permit any more exploration of oil. And I just wonder how long their independence will last. You know, it's great that they made that decision, but at the end of the day, if someone wants to go in and get it, they're going to do that. We're seeing that with Russia and Ukraine, like, right? So
Right.
let's put a pin in that. But just to
Pathetic.
go back to also the other thing I'll say about Pakistan and India, that's where I think things are going to come to a head first. I mean, there are two nuclear powers. And this actually kind of leads into the next part of the discussion that I wanted to have, which is
And a
on the energy
question from
production.
Scott. Also, he's asking how
Okay.
we going to live as hunter gatherers after the nukes meltdown. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. That's what I said. I put a
Yeah.
caveat, Scott, that if we do not destroy the last vestiges of the wild in
Ugh.
little corners of the world where they still exist. So I would reference the interview with Sid Smith, mathematician, Green Party leader, and Guy McPherson on Nature Bats Last. That was in the we gave a link to that in our last interview, our last
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah.
Sid Smith thinks that yes, it takes many decades to decommission a nuclear power plant, but it doesn't take too long to secure the fuel and to put it someplace secure and buried. So he doesn't think that the collapse of industrial civilization or the contraction, let's say, because again, we're envisioning that this doesn't happen overnight, but that there still might be some resources to at least secure the spent fuel responsibly so that it doesn't impact others. I would say, though, if that spent fuel is not in your neck of the woods, you're probably not going to spend your resources securing it if it,
Yeah,
So
and
I think
also
it's
we
still a
have to
valid point.
have the people to do it. The people that are trained. All right, do you want to do a couple of
Okay,
more
so this gets
questions?
into my next part. Yeah,
All right. Yeah, we're 43
and that
minutes
gets into the
already.
next part as well.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
Well, no, we're 43 minutes already. So if you want, take it off. I have these questions, but
Okay.
they'll just have to we'll see what happens towards the end. Okay.
Okay.
Here we
So
go.
the next sort of thing that's coming is this idea of peak oil. And we have to clarify this. The term peak oil has been kind of overused. It's been overused. Some people are saying, oh, peak oil, it was proven wrong, da da da. All peak oil is it says that if you have an oil well, okay, in the beginning, production ramps up, and then there comes a point when the well just doesn't produce as much. And after that point, production falls. You're still getting oil out, but you're getting less and less and less and less every year.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just a review of what peak oil is. It's mathematics. It's not a theory. It's not speculation. And it's happened. What happens to oil wells happens to oil fields, happens to countries, and in 2005 happened to the world as it pertains to conventional oil. Okay? There was a plateau where the producers of that conventional oil weren't able to produce more. Now, why is it a problem if you don't produce more oil? As Tim Garrett showed in his video, there is a direct correlation between GDP growth, economic growth, and the oil that fuels that economic growth. If you do not have oil production growth, you cannot have growth in GDP. If you don't have growing GDP, you have an economic recession. If it's prolonged, it becomes a depression. Okay. So what happened then in 2005? Well, gas prices started rising. They rose as high as $140 a barrel or so. That creates inflation in everything because everything is made with, transported with oil. Okay? So it created inflation. And when you have inflation, that signals to the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates. The Federal Reserve raises interest rates, which at the time we had a housing bubble because they had interest rates at zero after the dot-com bubble in 2000 and the 9/11. So they already had low interest rates for an unprecedentedly low period of time. Low interest rates created housing bubble. And so as they raised interest rates aggressively to combat the inflation that was caused by high oil prices and the economy, the housing bubble crashed. The derivatives market based on those housing assets then crashed, which then caused the financial markets to crash, which caused Lehman to go bankrupt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know how that all played out. And then we had the Great Recession. Okay, so now what's happening? We had the pandemic and demand shut off. So the oil producers turned off the taps, so to speak. Then demand came back on, and most of the oil producing countries have turned the taps back on as much as they can. But some countries, like the smaller producers, have not been able to do that. It's not as easy for them to shut down and turn back on. So you're seeing oil prices rise. Why are oil prices rising? Because there's not enough supply.
And greedy producers.
Honestly, I think it's a supply. It's purely, watch Art Berman. He does a great job of looking at supply inventories and showing how there's just a direct correlation between supply and demand. So when oil prices go up, it's really not speculation. It's that there just isn't enough supply to meet the demand. Okay. All right. So one other thing that I need to review and to tell people about what happened in 2005 when conventional oil peaked. The only thing that got us out of the Great Recession was fracking.
Yeah.
And I know we all hate fracking.
But that's what happened.
I know we all hate fracking, and we wish that we would have gone to renewables, but just understand that oil is for transportation. We don't have transportation infrastructure ready for renewables to go at the next crisis. Everyone isn't driving electric vehicles. We can't just flip the switch and have charging stations everywhere. We don't have that ready to go. So if there's an issue with oil, you're going to have, every time there's an oil price shock, you have a recession. That's a given. The history record shows that. So the only thing that got us out of the Great Recession was fracking. In fact, all of the growth in oil production after the Great Recession was from US shale tight oil plays. Okay. Yep. So if those peak, and they were projected to peak around 2030, then we have a problem in terms of economic growth. So two things. Before the pandemic, the Permian is the shale play, the fracking field, if you will, that is the only one that's growing. The other ones have peaked. The Eagle Ford has peaked. The Bakken has peaked. You know, all of those have peaked. The Permian in Texas, that's the only thing left. And when that peaks, then the U.S. shale story is pretty much over. It was showing signs of peaking pre-pandemic. Where they were punching holes too close to one another because they were kind of running out of the good spots and cannibalizing wells for cannibalizing other wells. And then since the pandemic, there have been articles, I think I linked to some, that are showing people are scratching their heads. Why isn't oil prices are so high? Why aren't they producing more in the Permian? What's going on? It's growing, but the rate of growth is slowing. The productivity of each well is slowing. So we're seeing signs that a peak is coming sooner rather than later, in my and in Art Berman's opinion. Okay.
So the question that Poppy has really quickly, if I can interject, if supply is down, why are the world leaders begging OPEC to open the spigots? That's a good question, Poppy. I think it's a good segue.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
OPEC has peaked. They don't have the spare capacity. Okay. They don't really have much spare capacity. They were part of the group of countries that peaked conventional oil production back in 2005. Their oil wells are becoming less efficient. There's more water coming out of the wells than oil. Saudi Arabia just did an IPO of a public offering of their nationally owned oil company a few years back. You don't do that if you think your best oil producing years are ahead of you. They know the end is in
Okay.
sight. So they really can't, is the problem. So, and now with Russia oil going offline, we're going to see higher prices go even higher. They've heard estimates upward of $200 a barrel. Okay.
You know, can
Now,
I interject really quickly? I read an article, I don't know which business magazine it was today online, that Russia is still making money on their output, on their oil. That's the only thing, but they still are selling and earning. Is it to
so if
what
you go
countries?
to Zane, yeah, there's a geopolitical strategist, Zane, Peter Zane, Zeihan, Zane.com. He did a really interesting video where he explains the oil situation quite well. I can go into the details, but even though we haven't sanctioned the oil, the supply can't get out. There's three main routes the supply can get out: north,
Mm-hmm.
south, and east to China. The oil that goes east to China is on pipelines from different oil fields than the oil that goes west, let's say. The
Okay.
oil going west is blocked because insurance companies won't insure ships to go get the oil in the war zone,
Ah, gotcha.
okay, in the Black Sea. There
Mm-hmm.
are protests where dockers and ships, there's protests going on in the north, so that's being blockaded. And then the oil that goes to China in the west, those oil fields are operated by their less conventional oil, like offshore and that type of thing. They're newer oil wells that are operated by BP, Exxon, Western companies that have now pulled out. And as Rachel Maddow says in her book, Blowout, the
Mm-hmm.
Russians really can't extract oil if it's more complicated than sticking a straw in the ground and sucking it out. When you get to, that's why,
Really?
okay, Putin gave the medal to Rex Tillerson and wanted him to be Secretary of State for Trump, and because he was the head of Exxon and they wanted the sanctions lifted so that Exxon could come back in
Right.
and keep pumping the oil for them, because Russia, they have not invested in the there's just not that how can I put this,
They don't have the
I
technology
don't want
that
to be
they got
hard,
from the oil companies.
and they haven't incentivized that, especially when they,
Mm.
private investors can have their entire business confiscated on the whim of
Wow.
Putin. Rachel Maddow's book Blowout really goes into the nitty gritty of why they have not been innovative in their oil industry, but they are wholly and entirely dependent on it. So that's a lot of oil that is going offline in the global market on
Mm-hmm.
a scale that we have not seen since the 70s with the oil embargo. So just buckle up. I can't say that the high oil prices will lead to the Fed increasing interest rates rapidly, although they did just say that they are open to increasing rates more accurately. And I can't say that that's going to crash the housing bubble, the stock market bubble, the derivatives bubble, and lead to another financial crisis. But if it does,
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that will get us out is more oil coming online. And if the Permian is indeed peaking, the only other supply of oil is the Arctic. And that's the last thing I want to talk about.
Yeah, the Arctic. That's what we talk about every Sunday. Well, mostly, except this Sunday. Jennifer and I did the Lancet article, the new Lancet article on consumption. It was excellent. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So all I'll say about the Arctic is that I think they're going to go for it.
Yeah.
They're going to go get it.
Oh, I
It's
know they are.
melting.
I know.
I thought so. Shell abandoned its offshore Arctic drilling back in 2016 after $7 billion, saying that it was just too expensive with the harsh weather conditions, etc. They abandoned it.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're looking at expansion of onshore into the Alaskan Wildlife Refuge, which Trump opened up. and they had the first auction for leases. Only 2 small companies bid, no major companies bid. And so I was hopeful that no one's going to go get the oil in the Arctic. The permafrost is melting. The Alaskan pipeline is crumbling because the roads are crumbling. The infrastructure cannot support it. It's going to be too expensive to get the oil in the Arctic. They won't do it. And so once the Permian peaks, the economy will go into a slow decline and emissions will slowly come down and we'll transition faster to green energy. And that was my hope. That was my hope.
Yeah.
But then in preparation for today, I did some research on what's happening with the Arctic, and even the Biden administration is helping the oil companies in the courts, the Biden Justice Department. At first they blockaded everything, then the courts lifted it. Now they're helping with the environmental analysis that the courts need so that it can go forward. But they're saying, oh, but we're going to preserve this little lake where these migratory birds go. We won't touch that. But
little tiny. Yeah.
My point is if Biden is seeing the light or seeing the reality that if he doesn't get these oil prices down, right? Now, the difference between us fracking getting us out of the Great Recession is fracking was in flat land of Texas and North Dakota where we already had oil fields. It was just going deeper with the fracking, going deeper down into the fourth block, which before was uneconomical, right? That's why it was never done before. But suddenly you have $140 a barrel oil. Now it's economical to go get it. Although I have a paper in the description by a financial analyst who says that had we not had 0% interest rates, then this fracking boom wouldn't have happened because it's all basically debt driven. And investors have wised up to the fact that it's wholly unprofitable. And let this be a lesson to those pushing renewable energy. This is what happens when you have a energy source that has a low energy return on investment. And so right now we don't have a lot of, the investors have left fracking. They're like, you duped us. There's no profits here. Where are our returns? There's no money to be made in this fracking. It's basically been debt financed. And why is there no money? I would argue because it has such a low energy return.
Right.
You know, it eventually will show up in the math, in the money, in the finances. So anyway, that fracking infrastructure was very easy to build up very quickly during the Great Recession.
Yeah.
The Arctic is another story. That is literally a decade to two decades before that oil comes online. So if we do trigger another Great Recession, and if the Arctic oil is the only place where we can get growth and get the economy recovering again, if we go into a deep economic recession, that has implications for Green New Deal. How fast do you think we're going to build out green infrastructure, charging stations, if the world is in a global economic recession?
Oh, I hear you.
Do you think we're going to be doing that?
No.
Okay, well, here's a plan. Let's watch Germany and see what happens. If ever a country had an incentive to go green, now is the time. Germany is the leader in going green, solar panels and wind. They're a leader in that. They have the worst fossil fuel available, lignite. It's literally the worst in carbon emissions, and it's the lowest energy density of fossil fuels.
Lignite.
Putin has them by the throat, right, with this natural gas. If ever there was a country that had every incentive in the world to completely transform their economy 100% green, it's Germany. Let's see how it goes. Because so far it hasn't been going well for them.
No, it hasn't.
The wind stopped blowing. There's not a lot of sun in Germany. The storage problem is not solved. We still do not have storage for the intermittency of wind and solar. If you try to use batteries, your energy return plummets. And there's an argument as to whether there's enough nickel and lithium for the whole world to do that. So that's another story. But let's just watch.
Yeah.
Let's just wait. Let's just see if over the next 5 years, if Germany is able to launch they're arguably the strongest economy in Europe. If anyone can do it, they can. So if they can totally turn their economy green, then hey, maybe I'm wrong. But I suspect, and this is my last prediction, I suspect that we're not going to go green. I suspect that the world is going to double down on fossil energy. If they can get the Arctic energy, they're going to get it. If they can get Greenland, they can get it. Russians were just excavating, not excavating, that's the wrong word, but they were surveying Antarctica for oil and gas. Okay.
Sick.
My prediction is that if the energy return is not too high, if they can get the fossil fuels, I think that the elites, the powers that be, are going to get every last drop of fossil fuel on this planet to the point where if they have to live in Elon Musk created artificial habitats and let the rest of us choke,
Jesus Christ,
as the ozone level, as the ozone depletes and we burn from the radiation, I think they're going to do that. There's a huge growth right now in indoor vertical farming, underground farming. There even was a recent study of farming wheat indoors.
Wow.
The problem with all of this, desalinating your water from the oceans, yes, humans can continue to persist in artificial habitats long after life on Earth has gone extinct, and here's the big if they have the energy density to do it, if they have some source of energy that allows them to continue to persist despite the environment. And given the way humans and the elites and the powers that be have behaved thus far, I would argue that they will continue to use the fossil fuels despite what it's doing to the rest of us, and probably grow their own food, desalinate their water, scrub the carbon dioxide scrubbers just like they do on the space station, and live in their artificial habitats.
And this
run
is
on fossil fuels.
And the population will decline not through degrowth, but by, a piggy form of degrowth. They won't degrowth themselves.
Exactly. Isn't that what Don't Look Up? Wasn't that the kind of conclusion of Don't Look Up? They have their escape plan. And I just don't see us volunteering energy and GDP for direct air capture to clean up the environment, to clean up the air for the rest of us, so the rest of us can live well. Sorry to, end on a dark note. But
you're not bursting this crowd's bubble. No, but what I do like is that you take all the resources that are out there and you look at all these resources and you look at all the research and you look at all of it and then make your decisions, and you're not biased by any one thing. I think you're open. I like that. I think that's
great. I think one thing that might stop that bleak future is if a tipping point is reached with supply chains. And I think we saw that with COVID, where one small contraction of the economy leads to complete chaos in the supply chain. So even though you might want to continue, a small group of people or, might want to continue with the technology development and, all of that, as Tim Garrett says, if the system can't grow, it literally collapses. There's not going to be a slow contraction. It would just be a collapse. So if there's a tipping point in supply chains and mining and, we may have the technology to create these adaptive habitats, But will we have the supply chain in place to continue the mining, extracting, manufacturing, and shipping supply chains to actually build this new world out? That is a question.
That's a big question. That is a big
Yeah.
question. So let's see what's going on with our interactive chat, and everybody is being is very chatty, chatty. Okay, I don't see too many cues on
That's
this
all I
last
have.
one.
So let's hear. I want to know what other people think. Yeah,
Well,
let's
we've
hear from
got some
them.
questions. I'm going to put up, what did Jeremy
Or
put? Okay,
comments. If
Jeremy.
other people
Jeremy.
have.
Not just, he's talking about the EV movement, not just insufficient lithium. You can't use electric cars without fossil fuels for asphalt roads, manufacturing at high, you know, heat, global distribution of parts. I mean, there's such a conundrum with everything. Everything.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, the heat issue. Dr. Reese, the
Oh, he's
ecologist,
amazing.
you forwarded me a paper, Sandy,
Yeah,
there. Yeah, talk about manufacturing processes that cannot be run with renewable energy. Now, there's this paper circulating around from some guy at Stanford who claims that we can run the whole world on renewable energy using different manufacturing processes. And he goes into the chemistry of that. I would argue, I haven't looked into it, that those processes are less efficient or very expensive, and that's what hasn't been done. Yeah. So I think the point that was just made is very valid, that we don't processes in place that can be run on renewable energy. We still need fossil fuel.
I think so. All right, let's see. We have some that go back to.
Am I frozen?
All right, here's Jean. No, you're not frozen. We're just getting a little, blip. Jean, what will happen is that there will be a huge die-off of the poorest people in the world, and there will be wars to keep the last for ourselves. And she made that comment before you even talked about that. About the elites. I hate the word elite. I don't know. I don't have a good word for them, but are you frozen now? Oh, right at the end when we're hot and heavy here. Oh, jeez. You're going to come back out and come back in? Oh, Lord.
Well, I don't either.
Oh, no. You're
have
That's all right.
Word. We
It's we've been at hour 10. I'm just well, let's see. We have a couple more questions. Thoughts on global. Oh, okay. Poppy, when she comes back, I'll ask that. This is live, and not everybody's internet connections are all different. This has been a great conversation. I have loved it. There are a lot still of questions for. Phillise when she comes back. I hope she comes back. If not, hopefully she'll come back again. I know she is writing a book, and that is going to take a lot of time because I made her the offer to be part of our team. And it says she's in the green room, but I don't see her. I don't see you. Do you hear us, Phillise? Okay, here you are. Can you hear? Can you hear?
I'm here.
Okay.
I can hear you great.
All right, then let's just try to get a few in before we're.
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
All right. Everybody's chatting away. It's been a great chat, a great talk. I've really enjoyed it. I was telling them that I want you to be part of the team, but you're going to be busy with your novel. So let's see here. Any more good questions?
You know what? For you,
yes.
Sam, me, I will join the team. I will absolutely join the team for you.
Oh my God, what a dream. I would love to have you on with Antonio and Nicholas and Jennifer. Jennifer couldn't join us today because she's working, but we won't take much of your time. You just fit us. You fit us really well. All right, let's just see if there's any more something that okay. Poppy, she says, what about the problem of mining,
I
manufacturing of all that green
love them
crap?
all. They are fantastic.
Oh, good, good, good. I think that we're losing. You know what? I guess it's the who knows what's. Let me try to get you in again. All right, you keep going in and out. I think I'm going to let you end. I want you to have the last say
Yes.
because our internet either it's divine intervention or telling me that my shows are getting too long, although this is too fascinating. And I have all of you had so many questions, guys. I love you all. I'm so sorry that I couldn't get to all of them. You're wonderful. And I'm going to give you something. Truly a guest, which I love her name. Phillise is an excellent guest. Love her way of putting things together and explaining things. So do I, because you're so
And
articulate.
put the questions in the chat. If you can put the questions in the chat.
Well, I have too many. We have so many. We have too many. I think we're going to.
But put any questions in the chat
Oh, you'll see them.
and we'll respond to questions in the chat.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then I have another idea. In the comments after this goes live, we're over, but we're not live.
Or save them and
Yeah, put them in the comments section, and Phillise can go back in, and then she can look at the comments and answer them right on the chat. We also have a Discord, which I've started over again, but we won't go there today. But just put them in the comment sections. All right, and Phillise, take it away. Take it away. I'm going to put a little music on for you to give us your goodbye. I don't know if we can even hear you. Hey. No, we can't hear her. Something's going on. It figures. Divine intervention.
okay.
Everybody's-
I don't know if you can hear me, but
Can
if
now.
you can,
Can now.
if you can hear me, thank you so much, Sandy. Well,
I love you.
all right.
I love you. All right, guys. This is not the last one.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you very much. And I will respond to questions in the comments.
All right,
Okay.
great. I've coerced you. She'll be coming back. All right,
Bye.
guys. Well, peace out.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Yes, I want to reach out and hug you, but you're 3,000 miles away. Love you. Mwah. Kisses, hugs, and all the good stuff. All the good stuff. All right. Well, you fit.
Thank you.